did want to talk about, herd specifications. We talked a little bit about it in the other group just to give them a primer on, how to verify whether or not something is building quality. And the bottom line is right now you're almost on your own for that. And we can help steer you and guide you on what to look for. But the effort is underway as a joint venture between the USHBA and the ASTM subcommittee, the D3707 subcommittee that's focusing on cannabis as a whole. Gene was telling me the other day that we're hoping to have a bifurcation there where we can move away from cannabis as a whole, because right now these meetings are very painful. ASTM is a volunteer organization, and every time they have a D3707 subcommittee meeting, you've got to sit through hours of people talking about ASTM certifications for testing cannabinoids and dust content in a trimming facility as being safe for the work, like just a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with what we're looking at with fiber industrial hemp. So I have been involved in that committee at one point. Jacob Waddell was involved at one point. Ty, long ago, before even Jacob and I was involved, he's now involved again. And Alex Escher has also been helping to work on this. The university, Gene, help me remember the university we just sent the samples to.
North Dakota State University.
Luke.
State University Department of Mechanical Engineering.
Yep, and they are helping us, you guys, to come up with what is needed in the United States building scene for hempcrete right now, which is an ASTM certification for whether or not a herd sample is building quality. And that is critical. Without that, it makes it very difficult even to get projects approved of a certain scale. Every building material that goes into a project like the one that David did in Newburyport has an ASTM certification that qualifies its characteristics as suitable for the use that you're engaging it for. So, how do we create that testing protocol here with ASTM? It has to be done through university research, through cooperation between stakeholders like the members of the USHBA, stakeholders like me who are actively engaged in building with it, and other end users. And what we're hoping to do is model how are we investigating whether or not a sample of hemp hurd is building quality after our French counterpart, which, to the USHBA, which is the Construire en Chambre, the CNC, which is a third-party professional body in France that verifies material standards and best practices specifically for hempcrete, okay? That is something that we have to do here in order to have some parity with the producers who, as of right now, are basically self-certifying that they have building quality herd. Any producer, again, this is not an outright condemnation of the producers. I understand from a business perspective why they're keen to do this. They do see hempcrete as a potential, offtake for their product, and I don't fault them for that. What I do fault them for is claiming that a sample or a quality of hemp hurd is building quality without knowing what that means, without caring what that means in the case of a handful of bad actors, and without the proper backing of an ASTM standard to be able to say that, right? Just like the FTC thing with the R value, a producer of hemp hurd is risking quite a bit. Ray touched on this in the last conversation. They're risking quite a bit telling someone, hey, we've got a building grade hemp hurd, and then it shows up on the job site and negatively impacts either the productivity or the finished product of that hempcrete installation because it was in fact not building quality. So what are we looking at? What are we talking about when we say, is a hemp hurd building quality? Number one is the granulometry, the idea of the size and the distribution of the various sizes of the hemp hurd in that sample, right? And as you can see here, this is a close-up shot from years ago of this, building quality hemp hurd that we're bringing in from France that is certified by the CNC. That's their seal of approval. Our supplier is not the only one in France that has this certification. There are many others This is not something that was derived by Chambrier to differentiate themselves. It's something that everyone in France who's a producer of Hemp Hurd and even lime binder for hempcrete participates in. And it's created a great sense of parity in the industry and has propelled them to be able to do the kind of projects that we see happening in Europe and elsewhere. So granulometry, the size and the distribution of the different sizes, that I'm not saying we want one uniform size of hemp hurd. What we want is a blend of various different sizes that, when turned into this slurry of hempcrete and installed into the forms, whether it's sprayed or cast or precast, creates that knit that we want, right? If you have, it's just like for those of you that are familiar with, modified and clean stone for either drainage or sub base for paving, right? Modified stone is what you use when you're putting stone under concrete, because it has a variety of different size pieces of stone that compact really well, right? And make a really strong base, versus the clean stone. And I can never remember if it's 2A or 2B. The clean stone is more for drainage, where you have a very uniform size of stone that doesn't have a lot of particulate in it, that allows for water to flow through it. If you've ever tried to pack clean stone, it's like packing marbles. It doesn't pack, right? Similarly for hemp hurd, the granulometry, if it's off, if you have too much of the same size hurd, you're relying almost exclusively on the bond of the binder and not on the knit of the matrix of the different size particles coming together. So moving on from that, cleanliness in terms of dust and fiber content. Excess dust and fiber are not helpful in the context of what we are trying to create, which is a lightweight insulation and walling material. Excess dust obviously can rob moisture from the mix. It can steal binder away from the mix. It can clog that matrix of air pockets, just like excess fiber does, that we're trying to create, right? When we make a hempcrete matrix, we want a good amount of entrained air, and that's where we get our really good R value from. And in the case of dust and fiber, you're clogging that matrix and you're making it more dense and less insulative, right? Now, that's not to say that there aren't some applications, especially if you're talking about a precast element like a block or a panel, where a little bit of fiber might add some strength and give you some things that you want out of that mix, that are different from installing it directly on site. But the reality, again, is that excess dust and fiber in the equation are clogging that matrix of air pockets, and they can rob you of moisture for your lime binder, and they can steal the binder away from the mix. So in general, anything that has less than 3% dust and fiber in it is going to be suitable for building in terms of what I just described. Anything more than that, and you're taking a risk. We've all seen it in a sample of hurd. There's a big wad of fiber that comes out. You don't want that in the middle of your matrix of hempcrete, whether you're spraying or hand casting, right? It's easier to get away with a lower quality hemp hurd when you're hand packing than it is when you're spraying, which again is the reason why I went for this product, right? So color is the next metric. The extent to which there is visible presence of degraded or rotted hurd. The cell structure has collapsed. If it's dark gray and ugly looking, it's probably flattened, and you can literally tell that cell structure has begun to collapse. So color quality is not I think the French have pushed this a bit too far in one direction. I think we can have a little bit more discoloration in hemp hurd, but that's an opinion. That's not something that's been verified by, university research. So these are all reasons why we've engaged with the university in North Dakota there to look at all these things. Moisture content obviously is really important. There were reports, and I think, Gene, you wrote an article on this of storage facilities for hemp hurd catching fire. Why is that? Because the moisture content was too high, and the stuff started to mulch itself. And when you get to a certain point in a mulch pile, if anyone's ever had to turn one, you're risking combustion when you have too much moisture in a very dense material like this packaged together. So moisture content is important. Packaging is the final thing that we're looking at. And the idea that every bale of hemp hurd needs to be in a plastic bag sucks, right? That's a terrible thought. The reality is, when you have hemp hurd in a super sack and you're shipping it long distances, that hemp herd might leave the facility in a format where they did their job. It's nice and clean. It's ready to go. But in the process of shipping, if that herd is not immobilized, it can mill itself and grind itself down, right? Again, this is an argument for, localized resources for hemp herd that don't have to travel, thousands of miles by truck. But the reality is any super sack of material, if it's not a dense, compacted bag of material, it's going to allow that material to shift and move against itself in transit. You can create more dust and create a lower quality hemp herd with that. So this is something when I first started this that I didn't, properly assign the value to, but the packaging is critical. So here's a slide talking about that. I won't spend too much time on it because I know we're coming to the end here. The other nice thing about having them in bales like this, specific to our system, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. It's one bag of herd like this to one bag of binder. You can't mess it up. There's no weighing. There's no scale on the job site. If you're working out of a super sack, you've got buckets and trash cans and a big package scale, and you're trying to keep up with the mix and you're weighing stuff out. All of that adds to the cost of a herd, right? You guys, like, if it's a little bit more expensive to get it in a pre-weighed bag that's appropriate for the application that you're doing to where you don't have to measure it, you are saving money by not having to dig it out of a super sack. And again, I mentioned this the other day. Tim had a good comment, which is that, old tradespeople are very crafty and they will find a way to do anything quickly and efficiently. So that's not to say that you can't work efficiently out of a super sack. The point I'm making is that having it in a unit like this that's appropriate for the mix that you're doing definitely helps your productivity. And they're more easy to manipulate on a job site. If I get a pallet of hemp herd bags like this delivered to a job site, and there's 8 or 10 of them, and they got dumped wherever the truck stopped, it's not that difficult to go roll the truck over and load up the 20 or 30 bags we're going to need for the morning and bring them right to the mixer, right? You can do that when it's in a unit-sized bag like this. When you have a big super sack that's 500 pounds, you either need 7 people to move it or you need a skid steer, right? So think about stuff like that too when you're thinking about a resource. Having it packaged like this, it's going to cost a little bit more. Melissa's herd, for example, South Bend, which is one of the ones I will openly say I think is getting very close to a building quality hemp herd. They can offer it to you in a bag like this, but it's more expensive than if you get it in a super sack. So if you're close to her and you don't mind having to weigh it out, get it in a super sack. If it's further from you and you want to be really efficient on a job site, or maybe you don't have a skid steer to move big bags of stuff around, consider buying it in this bag, because yes, it is more expensive to have it this way, but it's going to save you money in terms of productivity. So I think this is my last slide. Yep. Standards are important. Many producers, like I said, are self-certifying. I called them all out when I was in Montana at the IND summit. I said, you can't self-certify. This is the building industry. We can't do that. And the reason why they're doing is because they're left to do it. There is no standard yet in the United States. So, devil's advocate, their argument is, well, give me a standard and I'll do it, right? I mentioned it already. It's easy to be fooled by a low price. Think about it. Just because it's cheaper in a super sack, does that mean that ultimately by the end of your project, is that herd going to be cheaper than getting a pre-bagged product? Maybe, maybe not. And again, lack of ASTM or any US certification can lead to project failures or increased costs, all of which are black eyes to you as the individual contractor, or maybe even to the industry at large. Too much dust, bad for the binder. Discolored herd represents, collapsed cell structure and also an increase in the microbiota in that herd, which can lead to fungal blooms if you're not careful. Usually most of which are surface level and they're not penetrating, but you can have that issue where, you used a lower quality herd. It was a little ugly. It was a little discolored. And then, oh my God, the wall's fuzzy. Why is the wall fuzzy? That's a hard one to explain to a client. Again, the improper granulometry can lead to poor quality hempcrete. It can be more difficult to install. In the case of the spray application system, we had one of our owner operators this year who tried to use a hemp herd, and I won't say where it was from, but it was too uniform. Again, that whole concept of like packing marbles, it was not working with the spray machine, and this operator was damn near in tears about that. And what the solution was, they actually had about 80 bags of our material in their warehouse. And I said, look, go get it, try it. If that's not the problem, then I'll come and we'll figure out what the problem is. Turns out that was the problem. As soon as they had this stuff, it was spraying perfectly. Everyone on the job site was like, okay, I get it. That's how it's supposed to work. So, that granulometry thing is key. And then again, poorly packaged or inconsistent herd slows productivity on site. If you're mixing well, you've got a good mixing ratio, you're running through a pallet of bags, everything's working well, and then all of a sudden you open a new pallet and it's different. Your mix ratio is off. All of a sudden, you got slowdowns on the job site. Oh, this batch came out weird. It's not packing properly. Why is that? Well, it's probably because the herd in that bag was from a different run and it's not consistent to the same sizing and quality of what you had before. And then another thing I will say is that with some of the American producers who are getting their equipment online, many of whom have cobbled together other pieces of equipment for the conveying, the screening, the packaging of the hemp herd, pieces of old farm equipment basically that are, on their last legs that they're resuscitating. We had a chunk of metal, an L-shaped chunk of metal come through the E-Easy one time that scared the shit out of all of us because it went through the wall. And if there was anyone on the other side, it would have been a bad deal. Okay. So that's another thing too. Any foreign objects, there have been reports of Chinese hemp herd having like 2x4s and random crap in it. And some of the American producers even too, you can see they had a weedy field and there's like chunks of weeds and other plants in that mix. So you want to make sure that you have a really clean, really consistent hemp herd. And I'll stop there so we can have a moment here to collect ourselves at the end.